Let's see. Okay, it's 7:05. I didn't mean to set this up where we had a waiting room. I just always like for folks to be able to get in immediately, but we do have a waiting room, so I'll be sure to monitor that as we go forward. But I want to go ahead and just say welcome to all of you, particularly our Fairhaven folks. We're appreciative of you taking some time out of your busy schedules and sharing with us what your experience has been as being a merged satellite campus of Chapelwood, as we are discerning whether that's right for us here at Grace. So welcome not only to Fairhaven folks, but also to the Grace folks. We're glad you're here. Hang on. Oh, thank you, Collin. I'll see if I can do that while doing everything else. Okay, so I would invite you to join me in a moment of prayer as we ask God's blessing upon these two churches gathered here tonight. So as you're willing and able, let's pray together. Loving and gracious God, for not only for the gift of this technology that makes connecting possible during this sort of unprecedented and somewhat uncertain time, but we give you thanks for that. But not only that, we give you thanks for each other and the Christian faith that we share, and our love for you and our desire to serve you and serve our fellow humans here in Houston. We ask God a blessing upon this call, that we might have your discerning spirit working in us, that we might lead our congregation to the correct place in ministry and the correct place in life. We ask this, as we always do, in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, give me 1 second. I've received instructions on how to shut off the waiting room, and I'd like to do that so I don't have to keep hitting allow. So give me a second, and then we'll get started. Yeah, it won't let me do it for some reason, Collin, but thank you for the advice. Okay, so the next item on our agenda was really just a statement of purpose, and kind of why we're here. As a reminder, we probably already kind of covered it this evening in just kind of chit-chatting with each other, but we have various numbers of Fairhaven leadership as well as staff here. I think only two staff members, right? Andy, the two pastors, and then lay leadership. So Bob Luton and Andy Cunningham are the pastors there, and then there are 3 or 4 lay leaders from that congregation as well. So the purpose of this call tonight is to basically open up conversation between these two congregations, that we being Grace Church, might get a better feel for what it might look like for a Grace Church to be merged with Chapelwood in a way that Fairhaven is now. Fairhaven, as I understand it, has experienced a great deal of growth in the last 3 years or so. Have around 200 in worship in there. Is that just in your Anglo communities, Andy, or is that across the board?
Yeah, that's just in the 2 existing communities that were there. The Hispanic community came in later.
Okay.
About 6 months later, and they brought with them somewhere between 120 and about 160 folks. And then we have a small Korean congregation as well that meets on campus.
Okay. But when 200, you're talking about sort of the 200 folks in the quote unquote Fairhaven services. Okay. Good to know. So anyway, that's what we're here to be about. We're just going to kind of ask questions and see what we can learn about what it might mean for a Grace Church to be merged with Chapelwood. And so that's our purpose. And then the next part on our agenda is just kind of to do an introduction. I don't want the Grace folks necessarily to do an introduction, because I think there's probably 25 or 30 folks here, but I think it would be a good idea for the Fairhaven folks to just say who they are, how long they maybe have been a part of the congregation, and maybe your role in the congregation. And the way that I like to do this when we do introductions on Zoom calls is I'll start with somebody, I'll pick somebody, and then once you finish the introduction, if you would then just choose another person, so that we don't all just end up staring at each other waiting for somebody else to speak up. So Fairhaven, obviously, you need to pick another Fairhaven person. So anyway, Andy, why don't you lead off?
Sure. Hey, guys. I'm Andy. I'm the campus pastor of Fairhaven. I've been at Chapelwood Methodist Church for now over 7 years. I started off at the main campus of Chapelwood on Green Bay. Was working with men's ministry and young adult ministry. Kind of got some great stuff started with that. Headed up adult discipleship, co-headed up adult discipleship on the main campus. And then I came in actually after the merger. And so I'm going to be the person who speaks the least unless called upon, because I'm the only of the Fairhaven folks who actually came in after the merger. And so these folks will kind of meet you folks where you're at right now, pre-merger and talking about all of this. And I've just kind of been the piece that came in afterwards. So I've been at Fairhaven now for a little bit over 3 years post-merger. And we've been kind of living into what it looks like piece by piece to continue to be merging. Because a merger is something that is ongoing. It's not just something that happens overnight and click, everything happens. We're still merging things. And so, but I'm just excited to be on the call with you guys. Let me do this. I'm going to call on next Bob Luton, who is our associate pastor at Fairhaven as well.
Hi, guys. I'm Bob Luton. I've been associate at Fairhaven for 35 years. 35. And, you know, I think Andy said it well, that a merger is something that's a work in progress always, but the heart of it is the way the merging of the two cultures is handled. And I've been fortunate to have been at Fairhaven long enough that and understood the people, I think, well enough as in pastoral care to be sort of able to sort of help folks move through that process. So let me move it to Linda Padavani while Bob's kind of working on his sound there. Hey, Linda.
I'm kind of a weird member. I grew up in Fairhaven, and so I have these unbelievably beautiful where I came to my faith memories there. I went away, got married, moved to, and was married at the Chapelwood Green Bay campus. And when the merger went through, it was almost like God had done it for me because I had such a love for both campuses. So anyway, I've been back at the Fairhaven campus for 3 years now, and have really enjoyed the benefits of both. Like any merger, gift and a curse, and we're constantly working and going back and forth on the merger. And anyway, it's a true love of my heart to be involved at both locations. So one of the beauties of Fairhaven, like Grace, is we have a very unique, very close culture with our immediate surrounding, with the people around us. We're truly in tune with our neighborhood as it has changed over the years. Fairhaven has worked really hard to stay in tune with that. And that I love about that church. And it's also what I love so much about Grace and your church there is like you're in such in tune with your immediate surrounding. Let me pass this on to Debbie Ing, who's my partner in crime.
I am Debbie Ing, and I've been a member. I don't have the exact year, so I'm going to say probably about 20 years. And before the merger, I served on a lot of different committees because we were small, and pretty much if you served on one, you served on all. I was one of the 4 members of the merger team. I was the chair. I don't like to admit that, but I was. So we went through the process of merging and answering the questions and researching things and finding out, and have then participated after the merge to see the changes. And like they said, there's still the changes that are still happening. So so merger questions, Bob and I were both on that team. We had a sub team of 4. And so Bob, I'm going to pass it to you, Bob Wolfram.
Okay, yeah, my name's Bob Wolfram. My wife and I have been members there since the early 1970s. When I first got out of school and we settled in this area. Of course, at that time, Fairhaven was a rather large congregation with services packed full, and we'd set up chairs on Sunday. Our kids grew up at Fairhaven. Gradually over the years, we watched as the neighborhood kind of matured and demographics shifted. We watched a gradual decline in the number of members and people worshiping until we got into the 2000s. As far as role in the church, particularly the last about 20 years, I've cycled through a number of positions as chairman of the board, pastor, staff parish committee, and really the last 10 years have been primarily involved in the finance committee and the finance side of things. So that was kind of a major area for me as we worked through the merger consideration. And since the merger, I've kind of retained that role, both in terms of looking after Fairhaven as well as being a member of the Chapelwood Finance Committee and Board of Stewards. So I've kind of seen both sides of that. So I guess that's enough for introduction.
Yeah, and I think that's all the Fairhaven folks, isn't it?
I believe so.
See,
Okay.
Debbie, you're on trustees, aren't you?
Yes, I'm on trustees. I didn't tell you that since the merger, I've been on some of the Chapelwood boards. I think I'm also on the risk committee and then on trustees. Yes, and the core team.
And
Okay.
I'm on boards for both Green Bay and the Fairhaven campus, so I kind of have a mix of both.
Okay, so I think I'd like to take the lead for the next few minutes. I'm going to ask some questions of Fairhaven folks that are basically discerned by me from a survey that we released not quite 2 weeks ago. We've had about 32 or 33 responses, mostly pretty optimistic. We've had 31 responses. And of the 31 responses, 22 are either in the category of excited or cautiously optimistic. And actually, there's 11 of each of those, 11 excited and 11 cautiously optimistic. And then 10 folks, well, 10 respondees, I guess I should say, have some reservations or very concerned. So 2 had some reservations and 4 were very concerned. So if that's a total of 6, actually, not 10. And then 1 person felt neutral and 2 were undecided. So that's just kind of a general look. And I don't know that that's a great way to necessarily, apply that to the entire congregation. But it is obviously of those who were surveyed and who took the survey, most are feeling pretty good about what could come down the pike should we decide to do this. Some of the questions from those who fall in those other categories, such as reservations or very concerned, fall around the idea of identity. One of the strengths of my church, of our church, of Grace Church, is its family feel. Grace is very much a family. Even though we have a sort of a mix of what I like to say, I'm actually a leader of 2 different congregations. I'm a leader of congregation who's been there, more than 10 years, which is probably half the church that's active still. And then those who've been a member of the church for less than 10 years, which is probably another half of the congregation that's still active. So we feel very excited about gathering on a Sunday morning and seeing our good friends and our brothers and sisters in ministry. So can one or more Fairhaven folks talk about the way that your church felt before you merged with Chapelwood, and then what has changed as far as if there was a familial feel at Fairhaven? Has that changed, or what has changed?
So I'll start out. I will say I have a dog that may start barking, so I may pass off real quick.
No problem.
That was one of the big questions or big concerns that came up, was the culture and the history of Fairhaven, that they felt very strongly that, or we felt very strongly it should be maintained, and was very important to a lot of people. One of the things they said is, you know, this is my church. This is a church that I've been through my whole life. You know, it's important to me, and I want it to be, and it also had the closeness of the community. And I think maybe Bob can talk about that more. But we have become a worship community of Chapelwood, which means that we still have, at least in my eyes, we still have our identity. And it is, I believe, a different culture from what I experienced in Chapelwood. So to me, it's two different cultures still. We haven't taken on theirs. Yes, there's some interaction, but I will say that was a very big concern and one of the things that we had to address. Bob Wolfram, you want to say something about this?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. It sounds like the distribution of people that are strongly for and maybe mildly concerned and deeply concerned probably is about where Fairhaven started out in terms of the split amongst the congregation of how people felt. As we discussed it more and more and got a lot of people's questions answered, I think the pendulum obviously swung in favor of the merger. In the end, we voted overwhelmingly for the merger. And I think by and large, people still feel the same about Fairhaven being a family and has that family feel. Obviously, there's some impacts of kind of a little bit of blending of Chapelwood culture into Fairhaven. And I don't know that that's bad. It's just different than we were used to. But I think overall, people would still endorse the idea that we've retained the largest share of our own culture within the congregation.
I also wanted to add, the name is still used, Fair Haven Worship Community. We still have our own website. We still do our own publications that have has Fair Haven on it. So the name hasn't gone away.
I think one of the key pieces is, Collin, I picked up the word satellite. And one of the things early on that was took a little time for us to absorb was that the Chapelwood worship communities were all different worship styles. And some major churches in America that have tried to do this have in fact done satellites, where they have even beamed the sermon from the mother church, you might say, out to the satellites. And we have not experienced any of that. In fact, there's some folks that are studying this nationally that are wondering how this has been done, because the worship styles of all of the worship communities that sort of are a part of what has become Chapelwood are so distinctive, from meditative to contemporary to high church to low church and so forth. And so I have not had any sense that Fairhaven's culture, in terms of the worship experience that we have enjoyed since the time I've been there, has had any pressure to be different. And I think that's a word of hope, at least it has been for us, that there was not a sense that we have a style of worship or a style of how we should be that has been sort of either subtly or overtly pushed as a part of the merger. In fact, it's been more of a celebration of distinctiveness than that. That's just my experience.
I think we basically just retained pretty much the same style in both our contemporary and our traditional service. But the only changes are really due to the fact that we've had some changeover in staff and some of the support personnel.
Yes. And in fact, some folks that have been going to one or of the other worship communities over on Green Bay, I found that they lived in a place where they passed us going over there, and they just stopped in and stayed with us, you know.
Yeah.
So there's been that kind of synergy.
Okay. I see I have a question on the chat, and so thank you, Leslie, for doing that. Or actually, it's on behalf of Pam, it looks like. So if you guys have, we're going to have time for open questions for sure from y'all. I'm just kind of doing some questions that I've discerned from the survey, and then at the end, I'm just going to say, okay, what are the questions do we have? So just to keep it simple, though, I want you to type your questions into the chat. And then I'll probably just call on you to ask your own question, but that way it just doesn't get unruly. We don't end up stepping on, standing on each other's toes and stuff like that. So thanks for that question, Leslie/Pam, and we'll certainly get to that when we get to open questioning. Is there any other Fairhaven response as far as like losing our identity or feeling subsumed by the larger quote unquote mega church and a much smaller church, being merged?
I think, I don't think identity is lost at all. And I don't think that's where a challenge of the mergers has come up in that area. I think maybe your questions when posed to Chapelwood might suit you better if you addressed it more directly as to what different things look like for the help and support you expect from Chapelwood, more directly what that would look like. And because Chapelwood has so many identities within it, they really try to adjust for the different communities. But I think where merger, to be a devil's advocate, where mergers have run into challenges is more the specific expectations of what Grace might need in order to continue their identity and what Chapelwood is willing to do in order to support that identity, even though it's part of a larger community. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I was going to follow that up with you with saying that was essentially what you all did in the merger document, right? Like, hey, these, X number of things are really important to us.
Yeah.
And so, is Chapelwood essentially willing to sign on to say, yes, we think those are also important. So yes, those won't go anywhere.
Well, and also once you merge, for instance, usually in a smaller church, you might not have a marketing department or a department that handles special events, or a department that handles, because usually in a smaller church, everybody kind of pitches in and does everything. Like Debbie said, if you're on one committee, you're on all of them.
Right.
And the benefit of merging with a larger community is that they have individual departments much more diverse. And where your identity would come in is the larger campus really understanding the culture that you serve and what your expectations would be in how they would support that, and what in turn Chapelwood would expect you to come back to them with. So the questions we asked in the merger were really good. However, we probably could have been more direct so that we wouldn't have run up against some expectations that deferred and took a little longer to work out.
Okay.
That's a devil's advocate kind of thing.
Yeah.
But any merger, I mean, for the most part, the merger has been really beautiful, and they have learned from us and we have learned from them. But sometimes, as human beings, we run movies in our head, or we have ideas of what it looks like. And sometimes the more specific we are, then the less challenges we run into once the merger goes through.
Okay.
Okay.
I
I
think
just
along
add
those
one thing?
lines,
Go ahead,
when we
Bob.
did merge, John Stevens really took pains to point out that the merger is really a covenant agreement. You can't spell everything out in a contract. I mean, like a contract, it's a covenant. There's certain expectations on both sides. And one of the keys is to be sure the things that are really important to you are the things that get spelled out in that covenant, knowing that there's a lot of other details. They're going to have to kind of be worked out after you get into the relationship. But it's like, what's really important to us, and be sure there's agreement on those points.
Okay.
And I think overall that has worked well.
Okay. And that again came out in the merger document, correct?
Yes, it did. Yeah, there was a specific merger covenant drawn up.
Yeah. And Grace folks,
Both
by the
sides
way,
approved.
if you want to see the merger document, it is on Fairhaven's website. So if y'all want to read through the merger document and some of the things that they put into their document that said was really important to them that Chapelwood agreed to, you can read over that document. It's not long, pretty informative. And I see we have several more questions coming through, so don't worry, we'll still get to those. I'm going to ask one or two more questions that I have discerned from our survey, and then I'm just going to open it up to our Grace folks. Unless Bob Luton, you said you wanted, I sounded like you were about to say something earlier.
Yeah, I just had one quick thing. The metaphors that were used in the merger, I think, are very important. One was adoption as opposed to takeover. And another was gracefulness. And I encountered, I think when that first came up, that there was some eye rolling, as if that was maybe over the top, or that it was overstated. But I'll just have to say that I experienced gracefulness at all levels. There were some, hot spots here and there, but the other thing was that there was a lot of things that would have happened if you're adopting a child into your family that went on that left us feeling cared for. That I think those two metaphors are very important. And let me if I can have another 10 seconds here.
Sure, certainly.
I think this is for me a metaphor. I was responsible for doing most of the IT stuff at Fairhaven because nobody else was around to do it. Not that I'm an expert. And it came time for me to interface with the head of IT at Chapelwood. And I said, what should I bring? Should I bring binders of tech stuff and specs and so forth? And this person that was the head, who had his own software company before joining Chapelwood and degrees in IT and so forth, said, no, Bob, I just want to come and learn from you. And I thought that was an amazing thing for a professional in IT to say to an amateur who had been trying to hold things together. But I think that gracefulness actually penetrated all of those levels of people trying to work with us in the merger. With, there are some exceptions, but I think that was very important.
Okay, thank you, Bob. The other thing that really came up, and I could probably do two or three others, but the one that really came up a lot so far in the survey. Now, we're not closing the survey, Grace folks, so if y'all haven't taken it yet, I want to encourage you to do so, because we're going to keep that survey open for quite a while. Don't take it twice. I'll delete your answers if you do it twice, or I'll delete your second set of answers if you do it twice, but at least do it once. The other thing that came up just all the time, in probably more than 50% of the survey responses was, the question essentially was, what, if anything, concerns you about a potential merger with Chapelwood? And almost, like I said, more than 50%, the responses were concerned about a loss of autonomy. It's basically a loss of finance committee and loss of trustees and essentially loss of control of mission and vision. Now, I have made it clear, or I've tried to make it clear, I hope I've made it clear, that, Grace Church will still be in charge of its own mission. We're sort of, quote unquote, the experts in our own mission field. That's what John has been telling me. And we'll still be responsible for creating our own budget and raising our budget. It might be cared for by someone else, but we're still going to be in charge of that kind of stuff. But talk to us about if there's a level of control that you just don't feel like you have anymore, or something, in the terms of autonomy that once was there that is no longer.
Let me just jump in. As far as facilities goes, it's a good example, I think, that there is a whole department that's housed on Green Bay that handles the maintenance and upkeep of all of the buildings. that belonged to the greater Chapelwood community. And we had been used to sort of taking care of things on our own. Had our own vendors. Some of them were folks we'd had relationships with for a long time. And it did take some adjustment for us to realize that there was someone else that was in charge of using a different set of vendors. I might say that when the merger first happened, they sent a bunch of professional engineers over to create a huge punch list of all the mechanical systems at Fairhaven and what stage they were in terms of repair needs over what period of time and so forth, which was a wonderful way to start. I would never have thought of doing that. But in some sense, you know, we have surrendered some autonomy to a different office that has greater wisdom about looking over things than I feel like we may have been able to have before. It's a wonderful benefit, actually, in terms of economies of scale, to have somebody who does nothing but to keep their mind on that. But it did for a while, you know, create some sense that we're not in charge of that to the extent that we were before. Does that ring true with some of the other Fairhaven folks?
Yeah, that's a
Oh,
great
good.
thing to have a larger pool thing to pull from. The facility people from Green Bay are great because they have a larger pool of people that can, you know, bring the right type of people to build out different things or to repair different things. So that's been really great because we have a bigger outreach in that area than maybe we could have afforded or could have understood on our own. We have people that are actually construction people now available to us, that's their full-time job. And that is a real blessing in many ways.
I have,
Thinking,
go ahead.
That's all right.
So for me, I think one of the things that I had a little trouble adjusting to was I was used to going to meetings and we would talk about the problems in the church. And as far as that problems, I'm talking about, well, how are we going to find enough money to repair the elevator? This is the one I remember that we talked about. And we, you know, that took up 30 minutes and we kind of made that decision. And though you're not, the meeting contents changed, you're not asked for those decisions. But then when I take a step back, I don't want to be asked those decisions. I want to be asked, you know, what can I do for the community? How can we make disciples for Christ? These are not the things that we should be focused on. So, but it's different from the meetings that we used to have. You know, the content is a little different and it's handled in a different way. We still make some of those decisions. Maybe we don't have as many people making those decisions, but Bob, I'll pass to you because you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, we don't, I think what we experience is we do not control some of the detail in the area of finance, facilities, maintenance, even staff as we used to. And at times that's been a little hard to accept, but I think, as Debbie says, it allows you to focus on bigger issues and not have to worry about all of the details. I mean, Fairhaven was very much a volunteer-driven culture. I mean, obviously the senior minister and the associate and others were key people, but a lot of what got done was because volunteers initiated and led things. And my observation is that the Chapelwood Green Bay culture is a bit more staff-driven. Decisions tend to be made at the staff level. Major decisions and things like budget and all that are run through a finance committee that gets to ask all the questions they want. But still, the decision making is more the staff level, not so much individual people and volunteers. And I think in some cases, maybe not so much in finance, but when you get into some of the ministry areas, some of our volunteers feel like maybe they don't have as big a role or don't get consulted as much in some of the directions we take. The other thing that I think's been an issue for some people is there's a certain level of bureaucracy that comes with a larger organization. It used to be you just called the church secretary and she arranged your meeting room, or she typed up something for you or produced a report or whatever needed to be done. Now you tend to have to go through a process for reserving a meeting room and things like that, that some people more than others have felt a bit, well, it's new to them, and it's harder for them to accept, particularly some of the older people that are kind of like they've been in the church for 40 or 50 years. This is our church. We're not used to having to ask somebody if we can have a meeting or that kind of thing. It's I think it's more something to get used to and learn to work with than it is a major stumbling block. But it is something that you do experience when a smaller organization merges into a larger organization. So it's just something to be aware of. You will face that if you were to go through
I
with
think
it.
Linda's point's a wonderful one in that it has freed us to spend, I think maybe it was Debbie that made the point. It has freed us to concentrate on things that are really more in line with our mission and ministry, while other people are worried about some of the detail that had been absorbing us.
Right. But I will say one thing. Fairhaven came into the merger with a set of funds. We had an endowment foundation that had some endowed funds that people had given money through wills and legacy giving, many of which had special purposes in mind when they were given. It was mostly for long-term maintenance and things like that, but they were restricted in some sense, and Chapelwood has respected us making our own decisions about the use of those funds. They have certainly taken our input and respected our wishes on how those are used. So it's not like they just come in and take over everything and just do whatever.
And I wanted to go back to what Bob had said. I think there's clearly a different culture. In Fairhaven, it's volunteers. Volunteers do a lot of things, and volunteers have the knowledge. Whereas in, I would say, Chapelwood, it's more staff. But I will say that when you run up against this, if you go and talk to the right person at Chapelwood, it's more like the staff doesn't understand. It never occurs to them that a volunteer might have this knowledge. But if you go and talk to the manager and kind of work through it, then they help them understand, and you'll iron it out. But it kind of goes with this, it's growing pains is what I think of. It's not the way it used to be where you could just pick up the phone and do it or do it yourself. Now you kind of have to work through it and work with the person. And Chapelwood has been very gracious about working with us on some of this stuff.
One more thing I might add on that, just as a word to something to think about as you go into it, is if you have a couple of key volunteers that lead certain areas. In our case, the example I'm thinking of is the bell choir director. She was strictly volunteer. I mean, she was not a paid staff person, but her role in the church was almost like a paid staff person in terms of what she did, how she ran the bell choir, and how she interacted with the ministerial staff of the music director and others. Well, once the merger took place, she kind of found herself not in the same position as far as being able to interface on behalf of the bell choir. It almost would have been better off if she had been treated as an unpaid staff member, given the same rights and privileges as a staff member in terms of access, in terms of inclusion in staff meetings and things like that. Just she's not paid. She's not going to be on the payroll. I think it would have smoothed some things in that area. And there may be one or two others, and you may have somebody like that
and I think
their role is like staff, even though they are in fact unpaid volunteers.
Yeah, we have several folks like that, Bob.
Yeah, so you might want to discuss, if you go through this, discuss and think about how their role is best preserved or enhanced for moving into the future, and how they should be recognized within the relationship.
Okay. So I want to go ahead and move to some of the questions that have been asked on chat. There's 3 or 4 right there. And then if we can get through those. I have this meeting, by the way, going through 8:30. I know that John Stevens has made it clear he really likes hour-long meetings, but this is really important stuff. So I think that we need to spend at least the 90 minutes tonight. So I hope that you all can stick with us as we go through. So Leslie, I think on behalf of your mom, you had asked a question. Do you want to scroll back up in the chat and ask that out loud? Well, maybe she's muted or something. I can't quite see, but she asked on behalf of her mother, when you say for the most part that the church hasn't changed, what part has changed?
I would say that we have more resources.
Yeah.
Before we were running very lean and looking like we were going to have to cut even more. I mean, to be honest, we were going to have to cut even more probably. So now, so an example is like Vacation Bible School. When they went to run Vacation Bible School, they have you have the Chapelwood resources. They run the same school or the same theme. So you have a lot of that. You have resources they can bring over. So for me, I notice a lot more resources and opportunities that we have. I'm sure other guys may want to jump in.
Yeah, I would just say resources, one thing. I mean, financially, we're expected to pay our own way. Now, at the current situation, we don't quite do that. We do get overall a certain level of subsidy from Chapelwood at the moment. But long term, the goal is for us to be pretty much self-supporting. But the beauty is they've got much more in the way of financial strength than we had. With this COVID crisis, we'd have really been struggling, worrying each week, do we have enough money to pay the bills? Because the giving naturally has lagged during the COVID period, and yet a lot of your expenses, particularly staff, go on. We'd have really struggled with that, where somebody like Chapelwood has a certain level of backup, rainy day funds, what have you, that gets you past that. So you're not worrying about that all the time. Staff level, they have resources. If one of our pastors is suddenly called away or even goes on vacation, there's other people that can come and preach, and it's wonderful to have them as guest preachers. So there's a lot more support than we had on our own. And so I think those have been changes certainly for the good, as well as programs that we can access there that maybe we didn't have access to before in terms of participating with Chapelwood people.
Let me speak to the pastoral side of that.
Or trips or what have you.
When I was on vacation, Tammy Heinrich did a funeral for me. Before, I would have felt terrible about that situation and might have even at Christmas gone back and taken care of it. But because of the resources that were available with other staff people in pastoral care, I've had vacations guilt-free for the first time in a long time. I'm overstating it, of course, but you get the point that you know, we're linking arms with more people that can help us in concrete ways like that, but also that have been doing things on other campuses, not just on Green Bay, but other campuses that maybe can give us ideas of things that we can do or offer help and support. Like in Bible school that Bob mentioned, we had several folks that were from other worship communities that came in and helped us as counselors and workers in Bible school. And it was wonderful.
Buying power is really wonderful for VBS. For instance, Chapelwood purchased a program, and they did their Bible study in week 1 of June, and then we followed up 2 weeks after that. And so there was a financial burden lifted for that because we were able to duplicate and share things. Our senior Sunday school classes, there are programs that they can join the larger church with so that there's better pricing on tickets to go to different things, stuff like that. That's a huge benefit. You know, just a larger buying power in that way. That's a huge benefit for a smaller church. And even just the combining of ideas. I can say, I mean, there's truly been learning on both sides. Chapelwood has learned from us, and we have learned from them. So.
Okay. And then Matt Woodruff, you had typed a question in there. Do you want to scroll up and ask that question for yourself?
Well, my question is with respect to timeline and, you know, from the time that somebody first got the idea, maybe we should look at a merger until the time your merger committee was formed, about how long was that? And then how long did the merger committee operate before a decision was made to merge? And then was there a role for the merger committee beyond that in terms of implementing the merger?
So I'll start off with that, and let's just say we got on the fast train. I didn't realize we were on it, but we did. The first discussion that we had was, I believe, sometime in December, and what we just said is we knew that we had, basically we had, while we could make our finances, we knew where we were going. I mean, we decided we wanted to kind of figure out what path we wanted to take. And we decided that we were not going to talk about it until January because it was Christmas, and we thought, well, we don't want to start this all right now. But by the time we got home that night from that meeting, there had already been an email out about it. So we started in December. So we started, and the team was formed almost immediately. We were at one of our meetings, and I think I had volunteered to be on it, and Bob, I think you got on it because you finance, and then we had a person that had done a lot of technical writing, and the head of our board of governors at that time. So there were only 4 people on it, and then we voted in March, I believe, early March. So
I believe that's right.
So it was January, February, early March.
But then Chapelwood didn't actually formally approve it on their end till May, just due to some of the timing of their administrative process and when their budgets and all were approved.
And
there was a role for the committee. Once the merger was approved, we then became part of a transition team, and some people were added to that initially met with kind of corresponding members of Chapelwood to kind of plot out what all had to be done in order to actually accomplish the merger, you know, getting down to some of the nuts and bolts. And we played a role in that probably, through about the end of summer. And then after that, the core team was formed. It's
it kind of depends
now our local governing body.
Debbie, when did you put up the frequently asked questions? Was it up all through that period?
Yes. What we found was that we had some rumors going around, and so we wanted to be as transparent and also to help people be able to ask questions and as quick as we could. So we had a frequently asked questions where you could submit a question to the team, and we would answer it and get it up there. And we started posting those in December, I think, and address any kind of rumor that we heard, any kind of question that we heard. There were some that we said that we would not answer because they were inappropriate, and that's explained on there. But I think those helped a lot. And then almost every Sunday we had town hall meetings between the 2 services, Bob, and would answer any questions. And we, in most cases, in the beginning, we asked that only Fairhaven people be we did not invite people from Chapelwood because we felt that the people from Fairhaven would ask us questions that they wouldn't they may not ask if someone from Chapelwood was there. So eventually we asked like John Stevens to come, John Lindsay came, and different people came. But in the beginning, we asked only for Fairhaven at the town hall.
And I would say that it would be very, very hard to overestimate the importance of the frequently asked questions piece. The team that was working on that was Bob and Debbie were two of them, and another person that was a writer and had done corporate writing in a potentially contentious environment, were able to answer even questions that had a lot of loaded emotion in an emotionally neutral way. And I think that was one of the most important pieces in our merger, was the ability to ask any question you wanted to ask and expect very shortly the answer to that question to be posted in a way that was respectful, even if the question was hot and pointed.
I think in some way the timeline was probably faster than we initially would have liked, but the override, kind of in the background, there had been a fair amount of discussion in the fall about whether we needed to meet with the DS and ask for some changes in the senior pastoral leadership of the church or not. And that question was kind of bound up in all this as well. So it was sort of like, well, we needed to make a decision which way to go before it got too late for a reassignment, if that were ultimately what needed to happen out of all this. So it was probably faster than the ideal timeline. On the other hand, if you let it linger too long, there's just a lot of background discussion that after a certain point becomes unproductive.
Alan Tiller, you asked a question. Do you want to ask it out loud?
Okay. Well, a lot of my answers have already been made. I just asked, what are the benefits of the merger that you have observed?
One thing that I didn't mention.
What are the benefits?
One thing I didn't mention, but that I will, is with COVID-19, we have, Fairhaven has a food pantry, and most of our volunteers are retired, and it's a closed environment where you come in and you kind of interview people. And with Chapelwood's help, they've turned that into a drive-through that served a phenomenal number of people. And I think that it would have been very difficult for us to do that without this merger.
Oh, yeah.
And they've done an outstanding job. Whoever's working on the food pantry has done an outstanding job doing that.
Well, I think there have been some opportunities for us. I know my wife and I have taken advantage of some seniors activities over there, including day trips and lunches and programs and that kind of thing. The UMW, which my wife is the president of at Fairhaven, has done some combined activities with the Chapelwood UMW and had some access to speakers and programs they might not have had. And last fall, in fact, Debbie and Bob and I and our families all went on the Chapelwood sponsored trip to Israel, which I don't think we'd have had that opportunity strictly from. So there's lots of things Chapelwood does that we have enjoyed being a part of.
Alan, since we had asked your question, you asked another question down below. Do you want to ask it, or do you feel like it's been answered, or do you want to ask that one?
Yeah, go ahead and ask it. That's just, to what extent are the people at Fairhaven involved in overall management of the church, the Chapelwood Church? For example, are there members of Fairhaven on the finance committee or board of trustees of the overall church?
Yes, I'm on the finance committee. I'm the only one from Fairhaven. It's a committee of maybe, I don't know, 12 or 15. But they have been quite receptive and actually asking me for advice and input regarding finances, particularly as they pertain to Fairhaven. And there's a number on the board of stewards, which is their version of the administrative board. I guess there's 6 or 8 of us on the board of stewards. Debbie, I know you're on a couple.
I'm on the risk, but I'm also a board of trustee. So, and I work on like improvements that you want to do to the campus. That comes through, it comes to me to those boards, but we have a discussion about it by the core team. And there's already discussion. They
And
basically,
of course, Linda has been on our regathering task force. That's Chapelwood wide, as well as honchoing the Fairhaven version of that.
Do you still have a board of trustees or a finance committee of Fairhaven just to address with local issues, or?
we have what's called a core team. That was a change. You address issues, but not the same issues that we have, if that makes sense. Kind of to the higher level. The core
Also,
team-
to add a little bit of detail to that, Alan, there is still a finance committee, there is still a trustees, but it's made up of Chapelwood folks. And then if we so desire, like Bob is, we can ask our folks to be considered to sit on those committees as well. But like, for instance, if our air conditioner goes out, we don't gather our trustees and say, Kyle, how are we going to pay for this? We say, we submit a service request essentially to say to Chapelwood's facility teams, hey, our air conditioner doesn't seem to be cooling. How do we fix this?
Right.
Let's see. I skipped over a couple of people to get to Alan's second question, but I believe Kyle, you were next about the decision-making process. Do you want to ask that?
Yeah,
Or do you feel like it's been answered?
No, actually, I appreciate the commentary tonight, and I appreciate the folks providing this insight into this. And so I'll ask my question by way of analogy. So imagine that you wanted to do a significant renovation of your sanctuary, add an outbuilding, add a staff member to the Fairhaven community. What might that look like? How would that process go for working with Chapelwood?
Why don't you ask those one at a time, Kyle? Why don't we ask the facilities question first? If we wanted to,
I think that's fine.
Okay, and then we'll ask the staffing one. If you guys wanted to make changes to your physical campus, how would you go about doing that? Is that okay, Kyle?
We're doing something like that right now. We decided it was time to redo the men's and women's bathroom in what we call our fellowship hall area. It's kind of a central part of the campus, so it serves a lot of people, including the day school. And basically, our core team agreed we need to do this. And we went to the facilities people and said, yeah, we want to proceed with this. We had already included some money in a capital improvements program for this year that might cover some of that. So we basically said, we're ready to proceed, and they've worked with us to go ahead and find an architect and get some preliminary plans drawn up. And currently that's out for bid from some general contractors. So we can see what kind of bids we get back. Now, depending on how those bids square up with the amount of money that we talked about, there may be some further discussion about when we would actually go forward. But the process of initiating it has not been difficult.
we still have to come up with funding somehow. Correct, Bob?
We would have to supply most of the funding, which again, a lot of that comes from our capital improvements budget, which is part of those designated funds that I said we had when we joined up with Chapelwood via the merger. We also had a fair amount of money came in from the sale of our 2 parsonages, since we no longer needed to have parsonages. And we also had a couple of bequests that have come in a timely fashion in a way that we can use for that. So in our case, at least we had money kind of within the Fairhaven umbrella that we could use. But we've also been working with the Chapelwood Finance Committee and trustees to kind of decide how to budget that money. They're concerned that we don't want to run out of money too quickly and Fairhaven suddenly become a sinkhole for them. So it's kind of a partnership in deciding how much money is prudent to spend in any given year, and keeping an eye on the future. So it's not something we can do entirely on our own, but it's kind of in discussion and partnership with them.
And then what about the second part of Kyle's question, staffing? If you want to make a staff addition or a staff change, how does that work? Andy, I'd like for you to weigh in on that if you can.
Sure. So, one of the things that you guys hopefully have seen, or I sent it to Collin and he can send it to you, is that Fairhaven made a wish list. They had kind of made a wish list of things that they would hope would happen, but it necessarily didn't make it into the covenant. And so I've gone through that wish list and I kind of look at it, and really as a church, what I saw and keep seeing as we grow and shift and move is, we wanted to make sure that we could minister to all ages and stages of life. And so, for example, we hired a youth minister. The funding was there. Our giving was good. We said we need to do this. We knew we had youth in the church. How did we make it happen? It just came down to the fact that we needed a youth minister. The funding was there. We were able to do it. I found and started taking in candidates. We had job descriptions, and it was no question. If we had the funding, it was just something we could do. And so we were able to do it. Something you guys have heard a lot. Again, I came in after the merger, but I want to be able to tell you the beauty of this. You guys are probably experiencing right now what I would say for a church is, you kind of have to deal with these things like facilities. And if this breaks, we spend all our time on how are we going to fix it, like Debbie said. The beauty of merging it is there's things that now are off your plate and off the conversation that you can focus on ministry. I keep this in front of my core team all the time. Like, you don't have to worry about that. We need to really focus on how we reach and minister to all the ages and stages that come through our doors and respond to the needs of discipling the community and loving the community. And so we were able to actually repurpose even our existing staff, the folks who had been there for a long time. Like, one of our ladies had been a business manager and an office manager in the office. And I told her, I said, look, I don't need you to do that, but you've been here for 25 years, and I would love for you to capitalize on that relational equity you have with all of our folks and help out with pastoral care and do some of these kind of relational ministry things, like truly be with them. And so we really were able to repurpose some of our staff and focus them in on ministry where we don't have to worry about the business, the finance, and all of that. And that truly freed us to start actually being able to contact more members, contact the community more, and do those kind of things. So then all of a sudden our ministry changes, and all of a sudden everything kind of starts moving at, we can start getting a youth minister, a children's minister, a family, those kind of things, and then move towards helping out in pastoral care more and worship ministries and those kind of things. And I think that honestly, I looked at it again today as Debbie had sent it to us. 18 of the 20 things on the wish list are what we now have in place. Only got 2 to go. One of those is college ministry, which is always tricky. But 18 out of the 20 are checked off or being checked off the list as we speak. So that was pretty good.
Kyle had also asked a question. Do you see your second question there, Kyle? Do you want to ask that one too?
Yeah, I apologize. I might have a screaming baby in a few minutes. What if anything would you do different? We've heard a lot of rosy stories tonight. There's got to be some dirt.
I can tell you what I would do different. There's 2 things I can think of off the top of my head. One of it is that I would hope I would come to the realization earlier that this is not like a business merger. Because in my head, I kept saying, why would they want to merge with us? We have debt, we have some other issues. Why would they want to do that? And so I need to come to the conclusion is this is a church. There are different attributes than if I was doing a job, if you want to say. And the other thing I would do is we reported to the Board of Governors. So before we would issue our reports or before we would issue anything, we would go to the Board of Governors and we would talk to them, and then the next day we would issue that. I would not do that. I would talk directly to the, however you're going to do it, I would talk directly to the congregation, because we had some issues. Here's your dirt. We had some issues with, we would take it to the board and it would get issued by someone else talking in a different voice or telling a different story from what we wanted. So, or I would have the people sign something or agree to, this is the way, this is the vehicle of communication that we're going to use.
One thing I would do differently would be to encourage groups to step out of their comfort zones and do things with other worship communities faster. Our UMW has done a great job of doing some things with their counterparts on the other worship communities. I probably would have started being more actively involved in staff worship and staff meetings on the Green Bay campus that where there were staff members from all the worship communities present. I would have started that earlier and encouraged, the staff, other staff, to do that. It's a different thing to know people who are making decisions that you might have otherwise just talked with on the phone or sent an email. It becomes family faster if there is more interaction, even if you have to step out of your comfort zone. I started going on the Chapelwood staff retreats earlier than I really felt comfortable. It just seemed like a weird thing to do. We'd never done that, and then I didn't know anybody. And so there I was rolling out my sleeping bag in a room with another staff member that I didn't know. But once I got over that and started to get to know people, both in staff meetings and on retreat and other places, then it began to feel more like family, and it began to function in a better way. I would do that differently.
To add to what Bob just said, before you merge or in the merger process, Chapelwood had a certain vision of what Fairhaven culture was, and Fairhaven had a certain vision of what Green Bay was. And the changes only come about when you're intermixing. And so we recently, this past year, had an opportunity to host an event on the Fairhaven campus that was specifically designed for the Green Bay people. And it was amazing what they learned about the culture of Fairhaven and how much that seeing that changed some perception. When we began to invite them to little cultural community things that we did, and staff and members started to participate, and the same way with us too. That's how I ended up at Fairhaven. I was doing stuff over at Chapelwood. I came to a Fairhaven event and I listened to them talk, and I thought that's something I could help with in that interaction. So, and then I just fell back in love with Fairhaven and and stayed with it. But the beautiful thing is the more that we don't stand off and go, where there's other big guys or these are the little guys, or that's the church we're helping, the more we let those walls down, the better we can learn from one another. And so I guess I wish I had started those things earlier. And I guess that's what I hear from members and stuff too. I wish I had come over to Fairhaven earlier, or I wish I had gone over to Green Bay, Chapelwood earlier to get to know one another more. And it is moving out of your comfort zone, moving out of what you don't know, and being willing to voice yourself, when you do that. So anyway, I wish we had started some of that earlier in the process.
I would say I wish we had probably focused a bit more on communication, how we're going to communicate with the congregation after the merger takes place. Before the merger, a lot of our communication was Sunday morning through announcements in the services, detailed weekly calendars and all that were in the bulletin that was handed out every Sunday. Those are a couple things that changed significantly after the merger, because the advice from Chapelwood and some of their consultants is to minimize that particular type of communication. And I think that's left some people with a feeling they don't know what's going on. I think it's more of a feeling than it is an actuality, but it's a feeling. And the same thing that they can't come to an administrative board meeting once a month or once every 2 months. Most of them would come and probably not say a word or ask a single question, but they knew they could come, they could hear the discussion if they wanted to. And that's not really easy for them to do now. So you need to focus on how have we been communicating with the congregation? How are we going to communicate after the merger, as we have to try to fit our communications into Chapelwood's system, which has a number of communication vehicles, but in some cases they're going to be a little different than what people might be used to. So I don't know what fits for your congregation, but it's something worth thinking about as you go through a merger discussion, is what's that going to look like when we get to the end point.
Kari, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, it was actually me.
Oh, sorry, Dan.
It's okay. I was just, I guess, wondering, I don't know the background behind Fairhaven. Fairhaven's, was it a drive from Fairhaven that you were actively seeking a merger? And was that because of financial issues that you were experiencing? And I guess maybe I heard some allusions to some other issues that you guys were, organizational issues you were having. But so how much motivation was there to define a merger? And were you being approached by Chapelwood, or did you seek out Chapelwood, or did Chapelwood approach? I mean, how did all that work out? And were there other suitors out there too that you considered?
So
Lots of different questions there, I guess. Sorry.
okay, so I'll try to give you the history, and I'm sure others will jump in if I miss something. I think it all started because our membership numbers have dropped significantly. It's an older church. I mean, our congregation at that time was an older church, and we were making our financial obligations. We had some problems with apportionments. I think I'm not sure if we made it all the time with that or not. So we knew that there was an issue that we were going to have. We had tried different initiatives. We were a part of the Vibrant Church Initiative. I think there was some before then, and nothing seemed to particularly help us. So we had there was also a question about, at the time we had a different minister. I think that there was a question about, did they feel that would help? We kind of said, well, really the options we look at is we can continue on as we are, and we've got probably another 4 or 5 years before we're going to financially have problems. We could ask Chapelwood for a merger to see, can we merge with them? Is that possible? And there was also another church that they had considered merging, but we had some problems with them.
You can just text him and let him know that we're frozen.
I was gonna say somebody's frozen, but I can hear you.
Lost our connection.
But anyway, the second church had more financial problems than we did, so it didn't make sense for us to take that on. So we decided to start the investigation, if you want to say, it was a question, it was a conversation to see whether we were interested or not, and then it just kind of grew from there. Bob, you want to?
Let me add something. Part of those discussions in the fall where we were looking ahead and saying, okay, we're getting along now, but the trends continue, we can see the membership continue to decline, the financial support declining with it. We're going to be in more trouble in the future. And in some of those discussions within our Board of Governors, the chairman of our Board of Governors went to visit with Andy Noel, who was the district superintendent. And I think the first suggestion of the possibility of a merger came out of that meeting between he and Andy Noel. And shortly after that, I guess he passed that on to Chapelwood as well. And shortly thereafter, and I think they contacted us first. I don't really remember which way it was. But it was really that kind of searching for what's our best way forward that the possibility of a merger came up. Prior to that, we hadn't really been thinking about a merger. We were more thinking some changes we could make within Fairhaven itself were what we needed to look at, and we were exploring what those might be. So the merger was kind of a new, oh, we hadn't thought about that before, but then as Debbie said, the discussion progressed from there.
And we actually lost Kari and Dan who had asked that question, but they just texted me that they're logging back in. And I think there's one last question, and then we have a few more minutes after that if other folks want to join in. Martha, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, I just wondered, are you all having live sermons or live services on Sunday back at Fairhaven now?
Linda, you should answer that.
Yes, we are. Actually, we're having soft reopening. I'm part of the regathering committee for both Chapelwood and Fairhaven. And we're having our first soft opening, we call it, where we've invited our board members and some key other people to reopen this Sunday, actually. And we're gonna do a run through and see where we need to improve safety measures or anything else. And then the following Sunday, we'll open it up to more people. We have a lot of people that are interested in regathering. We have some that still want to worship from home. So our mission has been to honor both communities, and we will live stream our sermons now. We will also have sermons that have been recorded available for them to see, or they have the option to actually come into the church with social distancing, wearing a mask, and singing will be from the band only and not among the congregation. Okay. So that's kind of our process of where we're going right now. You can talk to me on Monday and I'll let you know how it went.
Okay.
We'll see.
And Linda, I want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong. This is just an example of how the campuses interact and make decisions differently. Because if I understand, the Greenway campus or Green Bay campus or whatever it is, Chapelwood's largest campus, actually went back to in-person worship about 3 weeks ago, right?
That's exactly right. The one thing that's been really lovely about this is we do have so many communities, and Chapelwood as a whole has honored the head pastor, for instance, Andy, or whoever is the head pastor of that community, who has stayed in constant contact with their immediate community to honor when each of our groups have felt comfortable in coming back. Also, Green Bay, the large campus, wanted to be able to set some protocol examples and be able to have some proven success before the rest of us started. But there's been no pressure one way or the other. It's really been how the individual community felt.
Okay.
But they did want to reopen first to test the protocols out over there. I think it was September 22nd they did their first. But we've been live streaming a complete contemporary service every Sunday since the beginning of March. And that's worked well in the interim. But yes, there are people that particularly want to get back to a live on-site gathering, even with all the restrictions we have to live with.
Yeah, well, okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's no more questions on chat. I want to make sure that folks in the sanctuary, because I think we have some folks in the sanctuary, that are viewing with us. So I want to make sure folks in the sanctuary have the opportunity to ask questions. So Kim, you can either, if you can hear me, you can either text me questions folks have there, or you can type it into the chat. But are there any other questions from the sanctuary or from our members here who have another 5 minutes or so?
Let me just say one thing to everybody too. You know, most of what we do, like anything else, and what God asks of us is just to be open. And so a lot of it is our attitude. And if we have fear of the big guy, or we have fear of change or anything else, then we just make it harder on ourselves, right? So if anything else, I wish more than anything that when you consider and when you're thinking about this, it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be the grace that you've known and loved, but the heart and spirit of grace will be there. And so it's really how you choose to interact, you know, and respond. And there will be things that rub you the wrong way, but there will be also many beautiful things as well. So, you know, it's just moving through those things that rub us and those changes that are harder for us. I'm preaching, I'm sorry, not my role, but, but anyway, I have found when I've had a rub, as my son explained to me one day, Mom, you're not everybody's cup of tea. And true. But I have found that there is this beauty in the one common good, which is to, you know, reach out to the community that surrounds us, the community that we love, the community that we want to participate. We want to feel like we have a voice and that we make a difference. And the only way we do that is by moving out of that. And the great thing is that we're not doing it alone, that we walk hand and side by side with you. And that's a real beautiful part of it. So sorry for the preaching.
No, it's great. Bob, I have to tell you, I haven't heard a phone ring like that in a long while.
We have an old rotary dial phone.
I love it.
Which when a hurricane comes is great to have. It requires no electricity.
Hey, Bill
I would
Young.
just say one thing. I think in the end, our congregation concluded merging was really the best way to preserve our influence in the community and the legacy of Fairhaven versus any other course of action we thought we could take. So that's what it came down to in the end.
Okay.
And I would say from the pastoral care point of view, that you probably hold most of the cards, and whether this will be received well or not, in terms of letting your voice be heard. If you have a legacy within the congregation, that if you will communicate that, you know, with confidence and grace to those that are looking to you for guidance, and that'll have a big effect. I would say from the pastoral care point of view, I went and visited many of the people. There were only 15% of the people that voted against it in our case, and I went and visited most of those. And I really can only think of one or two that are not still members of the congregation and active. Which is a testament to the kind of love that was shown even to those who didn't have the same opinion. So I think you probably hold most of the cards yourselves in whether the merger will be successful, in how, you know, how you're able to show confidence in a, you know, kind of an urgent confidence, you know, get it done.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. Hey, Bill Young, you haven't said much today or this evening, and you're, I think, our longest standing member. And just wanted to see if you wanted to leave us with any parting words of wisdom. I believe you're muted, my friend.
You got me now?
Got you now.
Okay. I think we ought to meet again and have a discussion. I thought this discussion was very good. Probably people have some follow-up to what they said, and we need to do that. the timing, I think a lot of people are worrying about it being done too fast. So I think, again, if the leadership would put together the timing, that would be good.
Okay. So Grace, folks, it's right at 8:30. Well, everybody, folks, it's right at 8:30, and I want to just kind of give you two words of kind of my intention. We're going to continue having these Zoom meetings. If you read my column that went out yesterday, you read that I'm entertaining returning to worship in the next 6 weeks. I don't know that we'll be able to do that. We're kind of keeping a close eye on the positivity rate. We don't want to get anybody sick, of course, until the benefits far outweigh the risks. So we may be able to meet together again, and in that case, we'll be able to meet again in person to talk about this. And our next Zoom meeting will just be me, and I'm going to let y'all just ask questions of me, of what my intentions are and what I think is going to come out of this. That it'll just sort of be Grace, folks, and then soon in coming is going to be creation of a merger committee. Where we begin to hash out some of our wish lists and what we think is important. And I'll be honest with you, I think one of the things that's important to me is that we keep the parsonage, not for me to live in, but to turn that into a ministry center. I have a dream of turning that into a shelter for battered women that works with Houston Area Women's Center, but that's down the road. That's just kind of an out there vision that I have. But we're still in this discernment process, and I'll be honest with you, I am perfectly willing to push this discernment issue into the first quarter of next year. But we're going to have to put some pen to paper and figure out how we're going to pay for church for the first 90 days of next year. That's important. And part of what's driving us in the short term. Of course, the long-term rationale has much more to do with vision and ministry, but we can't of course ignore the short term, which is primarily financial. So anyway, do not hesitate, Grace folks, ever to reach out to me via text or email. Stop by the church. I'm here Tuesday through Friday now. Back in the office. I do have a bunch of kids with me because our kids aren't in school yet, so they do pretty good hanging out in the bride's room and conference room. But come on and let's talk about it. This decision is far from made, though I think the decision is clear, but that's not my decision to make. It's your decision because it's your church. So we'll just continue this process, but be aware that a discernment team, a merger team will be created in the next couple of days, probably next week, actually. So anyway, I want to, Andy, if you're willing to lead us in a parting prayer.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for letting us
Hey,
speak
Andy.
with you. We appreciate it.
Just so you know, when I asked John to lead us in closing prayer, he said no. I didn't know what you might say.
I'm good. All right, let's pray. Lord, I just pray for wisdom and discernment, Lord, that our friends would have ears to listen and be able to discern. Lord, give them the wisdom of Solomon. Give them the patience of those who just feel and sense what you're doing and where you're moving through this process. Lord, thank you so much for us being able to talk through some of these things with Grace and to listen with each other, to each other. And Lord, I just pray that you will continue to give your unfolding plan for your preferred future, Lord. This is your church. Ultimately, Lord, it's your church, what you want. And so, Lord, I just pray for your lordship and your headship to be the guide for us here. May your Holy Spirit work in us and through us together collectively and individually, and remind us just how much we're loved and how much you hold your church in your hands. Be with our friends as they discern fears, and may your perfect love cast out fear. And also, Lord, may they just have a clear sense of direction where they need to step into for your preferred future. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks, everybody. Keep the questions coming. Take the survey. That's an important piece.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, Fairhaven.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.